It's 4:51 in the morning and a young woman is running. She's on the phone with a 911 dispatcher and her voice is shaking. She says someone is chasing her. She says she thinks they're trying to kill her. And then the call drops. Her name was Shannon Gilbert. She was 23 years old and she would never be seen alive again. But this isn't really her story, not entirely. Because Shannon's disappearance was about to lead investigators to something far larger than one missing woman. Something that had been hiding along a quiet stretch of Long Island coastline for years, undisturbed, uncounted, unknown. 4 bodies, then 6 more, 10 victims in total, wrapped and discarded along 15 miles of highway. And for over a decade, not a single arrest. Because the man responsible wasn't hiding in the woods. He wasn't a drifter, and he wasn't a stranger passing through town. He was an architect, a husband, a father, a man who, by every outward measure, was exactly like everyone else around him. This is the story of the Gilgo Beach killings and the ordinary life that hid an extraordinary evil for 17 years. Gilgo Beach isn't the kind of place you'd expect to find in a story like this one. It's a narrow barrier island off Long Island's South Shore, connected to the mainland by a single road, Ocean Parkway. In the summer, families come for the sand and the quiet. In the winter, it's empty, forgotten, easy to drive past without a second thought. That's exactly what made it useful to someone. In the spring of 2010, Shannon Gilbert had been working as an escort, advertising her services online. On the night she disappeared, she called 911 from a client's home, panicked, insisting people were after her. Police searched, briefly, and found nothing. Her mother, Marie Gilbert, was told, in essence, not to worry, that her daughter would turn up eventually. Because of the nature of Shannon's work, investigators didn't treat her case with the urgency it deserved. Marie refused to accept that. She pushed. She organized her own searches. She made noise when no one else would. And on December 11th, 2010, 7 months after that frantic 911 call, a police officer searching the brush along Ocean Parkway with a cadaver dog found human remains. They weren't Shannon's. They belonged to a 24-year-old hairdresser named Melissa Barthélemy, who had vanished over a year earlier without anyone connecting her disappearance to anything at all. 2 days later, investigators found 3 more sets of remains, all within a quarter mile of the first: Maureen Brainard Barnes, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello. 4 young women, all in their 20s, all working as escorts at the time they went missing, all bound, wrapped in burlap, and left along the same short stretch of highway, spaced out with what almost looked like intention. Investigators started calling them the Gilgo 4. And here is the detail that should chill you. These 4 women disappeared across 3 separate years: 2007, 2009, and twice in 2010. And none of their families had any reason to believe their loved one's case was connected to anyone else's. Someone had been doing this quietly for years, and nobody had noticed. The discoveries didn't stop with 4. Over the following months, in a search that stretched into April of 2011, 10 sets of remains would be recovered along that same corridor. Women, a man who has never been identified, and a 2-year-old child. Some of the victims, Jessica Taylor, Valerie Mack, Karen Vergeda, had partial remains discovered years earlier, in an entirely different location nearly 50 miles away. Nobody had linked them. It would take investigators years to even begin to understand the scope of what they were looking at. And then, just as the case seemed like it might break wide open, it stalled. Task forces formed and disbanded. Leads went cold. Years passed. 2012, 2015, 2018, 2020. The families of the victims, the same families who had fought so hard just to be believed, were left waiting with no name, no face, no answers. Meanwhile, on the other side of Long Island, a man named Rex Heuermann was living a life that looked nothing like what anyone imagined a serial killer's life should look like. He ran his own architecture firm out of an office in Manhattan. He was married. He had children. He was the kind of neighbor you'd wave to on your way to work and never think about again. Nobody was looking at him because nobody had any reason to. But there was one detail, buried in the original case files from over a decade earlier, that almost nobody remembered. A single, overlooked thread that would eventually pull the entire case apart. In February of 2022, Suffolk County brought in a new police commissioner and a new district attorney. One of their very first moves was to reopen every page of the Gilgo Beach files and start from the beginning. 6 weeks later, they found what everyone before them had missed. Years earlier, Amber Costello's roommate had described one of her regular clients to the original investigators. A large, unsettling man he called ogre-like, who drove a distinctive first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche and called Amber's phone constantly, obsessively, from burner numbers. That detail had simply sat in a file for over 10 years. The new task force pulled the records on those disposable phones, the same ones used to contact 4 of the victims before they disappeared, and mapped exactly which cell towers they'd pinged. Every single one narrowed down to a small cluster of blocks in a town called Massapequa Park. The ogre-like description, the truck, the location, it all pointed to one name, Rex Heuermann. An architect, a married father of 2, a man with no criminal record whatsoever, living less than 15 minutes from where 4 bodies had been buried a decade before. Investigators watched him, quietly, patiently, and on January 26th, 2023, they collected something he'd thrown away without a second thought, a discarded pizza box in a midtown Manhattan trash can. The DNA on that crust matched a male hair recovered years earlier from one of the victims' bodies. On July 13th, 2023, Rex Heuermann was arrested and charged with 3 counts of murder. He pleaded not guilty. For 2.5 years, even as more DNA evidence connected him to additional victims, he maintained he had done nothing wrong. Then, in April of 2026, during a private legal proceeding where a defendant can share information without it being used against him, Heuermann did something no one expected. He confessed, not just to the murders he'd already been charged with, but to an 8th, a woman named Karen Vergata, whose case had never even been formally attached to him. When prosecutors asked how each woman died, he answered the same way, without emotion, again and again: strangulation. 8 women, 17 years. One word repeated calmly by a man who had spent over 2 years insisting he had nothing to do with any of it. In June of 2026, Rex Heuermann was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 17 years, 8 confirmed victims. A man who coached community sports and sat in a Manhattan office by day, protected the entire time by nothing more than the assumption that people who look ordinary couldn't possibly be capable of something like this. And that's the part of this story worth sitting with long after the credits roll. He wasn't caught because of a dramatic breakthrough or a lucky mistake or a witness coming forward at the last minute. He was caught because someone, years later, finally went back and looked at a detail that had been sitting quietly in a file the whole time. A truck, a phone number, a pattern nobody had connected. Not every question in this case has an answer either. Shannan Gilbert, the woman whose disappearance started this entire search, was never officially linked to Rex Heuermann's crimes. Her death remains ruled undetermined. Her family has never accepted that, which means that even now, with a confession, a conviction, and a life sentence handed down, this story still isn't finished. This is the Cipher Room. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next room.